This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Generations are being impacted because of military service. And instead of just saying thank you for Veterans Day or remembrances during Memorial Day, how do we show up and support this community as often, as much as they possibly need throughout the course of their life?
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Qwynn Galloway-Salazar to the show today to talk about her work as an end-of-life doula, veteran advocate, and storyteller. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice podcast is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
The sponsor for this week's episode is Barbara Carnes Books, featuring the work of award-winning hospice RN educator Barbara Carnes. BK Books is proud to offer the End-of-Life Guidelines series, a compilation of 5 essential education booklets designed to support those caring for terminally ill loved ones. Visit bkbooks.com today to order the End-of-Life Guidelines series to support your journey of compassionate caregiving. This episode is sponsored by Odonata Care, creators of the Hospice Care Plan. Hospice agencies and end-of-life doulas are now using the Hospice Care Plan booklet to support their patients and caregivers. It's become a trusted resource in the end-of-life community, helping to educate and equip caregivers. Visit thehospicecareplan.com today to purchase the Hospice Care Plan booklet.
Dr. Q is my guest today. Her real name is Dr. Qwynn Galloway-Salazar, but we're going to call her Qwynn. She is the founder and CEO of In Their Honor. As an Army veteran, a spouse to a combat veteran, an end-of-life doula and educator, Qwynn has devoted over 2 decades to supporting military and veteran community. Through her visionary leadership, she has fostered national conversation and shaped programming that addresses the unique needs of veterans and their caregivers to promote quality of life through the end of life. Her groundbreaking work in 2023 with Psych Armor Institute on caring for veterans through the end-of-life collection addressed the challenges that veterans face and offered invaluable guidance and support for compassionate communities, caregivers and loved ones, and healthcare providers. Qwynn lends her expertise to Psych Armor, to the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization's End-of-Life Doula Council, and she also sits on the Veterans Studies Association Advisory Board. She's also a founding member of the Compassionate Communities think tank here in the U.S. Qwynn's efforts have garnered well-deserved recognition, with USA Today honoring her as one of their 2024 Women of the Year. This prestigious accolade is a testament to her impact on the community and the nation at large. I think that this woman and I are friends because I don't think she's ever met anybody that she hasn't been friends with. She's the most open-hearted person, enthusiastic, colorful. She's going to tell you herself about her work as a doula and how she sees that. She sees her many experiences as the springboard that brought her into this space where she's working with veterans at the end of life. She's going to be talking about the unique needs of caregivers of veterans, especially for the children that are working as caregivers of veterans in the family. We're going to be discussing the trauma experiences of veterans and how it affects their end-of-life experiences. Qwynn will tell you she believes the best thing we can all do for each other is just to show up simply, fully, and openly without our agendas with us. As she says, and I quote, check your shit at the door. And she's going to expand on that. She shares her advice for professionals on how to care for people who were dying, especially for our veterans. And you're going to hear her acronym for HOPE, HOPE. She's got a lot of wisdom to share. You can connect with Qwynn at intheirhonor.info or at psycharmor.org. And to make sure you've got the right sites and the right spelling, just check the show notes for this episode. So here we go, onward and upward, my conversation with Qwynn Galloway-Salazar. Qwynn, it's so great to have you on the show. Welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Helen, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Oh, I love that. That's a nice compliment because you have been interviewing with some of the best podcast people we know.
Oh, but you know what? Yes. However, when the introduction between you, myself was made, it was one of those like, wait, I follow her podcast too. And I'm like, I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation and as well. So I'm humbled and I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled that you follow the show. That's awesome. Okay, so we're going to start off with just a question to get to know you, relax a little bit. Doesn't have anything to do with your work or my work, and I didn't send this question to you.
Let's do it.
I know. Okay, and this is an easy one. Hopefully it's not too crazy. So if you could have your dream pet, hopefully you like pets, what would it be?
My dream pet.
If you don't like animals, this isn't going to work.
I mean, I can't, in our family, we love going to aquariums.
Ooh.
And when my husband retired from the military, he actually was a volunteer at the aquarium. So we frequented the aquarium here in Atlanta, Georgia, very often. Beluga whales.
You want a beluga whale?
You said,
I did.
right? You said, yes, if I could, I would probably have a beluga whale.
How big? How big is a beluga whale?
They're huge. And the tank would probably be massive. Hence, it would be something in my wildest dream. But they are so beautiful and mysterious and just every time we go to the aquarium, I'm in awe.
That's cool. It never dawned on me that you would aim so high, so big.
Well, that tells you something, huh?
Yeah, I like that. It bodes well for our conversation today.
There we go.
Gonna have some audacity with it. We can do that.
Let's do it.
So let's talk about your work. You're a unicorn, lady. You are an Army veteran. You're an end-of-life doula. How did you move from the military to working in end-of-life care?
I'll kick it off with saying, I remember asking myself that very question in the middle of the pandemic. And I remember sharing that same sentiment with my mentor at that time, who was living with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. And she was dying. And I remember her saying to me, Qwynn, not all who wander are lost. Because I said, how did I go from being in the military, becoming a veteran, working in the behavioral health space, supporting service members, veterans, their families, caregivers, to suicide prevention? Now I want to be in the crux and in the midst of dueling. And one of the things that she shared with me, Helen, was you had to go through every one of those seasons to be able to do this next leg of work that you've been called to do. And so on the other side of this office is my art space. That's my self-care space. And right above it is a sign that says, not all who wander are lost. And it's a constant reminder to me that for the 23 years that I've been supporting this population, every step along this journey, I had to go through to be able to meet veterans and their loved ones towards the end of their lives.
That's beautiful. So for those listeners who don't know this, that particular quote is from a very famous classic piece of literature. It's from Lord of the Rings. And these characters in the Lord of the Rings go on this huge trek. It's a quest. And that is one of the lines from that book. Not all who wander are lost. So every step of your life has been intentioned in some way and purposed in some way to bring you to this work. That's amazing. Amazing. Yeah. So tell me what your role as an end-of-life doula is, because doulas do a variety of different things and some sort of specialize. What is your particular variety of work as a doula?
Yeah, so when I first became a doula, I thought that I would be companioning veterans in my community that were dying. And I did that for a short time until word got out that I had this niche, right? That I was a veteran, that I was a spouse to a combat veteran, and I had these years of experience in the behavioral health field that allowed me to see how trauma, how moral injury, how combat experiences, and on can show up at the end of life. So I did this short stint in doulaing veterans and their loved ones towards the end of their lives, to building up to where I am now, where I like to say, I doula those that doula, right? Like I doula the doulas, I doula the end of life professionals, I doula the volunteers that sit bedside. And when I have the opportunity to journey alongside a veteran, I try to keep at least one. I do that, right? I do that as a way to remember, as a way to sit in the space and give.
I like that. It's always a good idea to stay in touch with that bedside work. I think that's so important for those who are in leadership positions who have moved away from bedside care. It's an important connection for us, I think.
It's such an important connection because I think once we get to this level, right, where we're just seeing how movements shape, how, so how policies shapes, how all these things and mechanisms move, there's almost an art to being that companion, right? That if we don't brush up on those skills, it's kind of like you get a little rusty, right? So I really try my best to balance that, at least with one veteran. Maybe not, throughout a full, for example, 6 months or so at the end of a life, but it may be something as small as collecting their oral history, right? So I do that as well. I'm an oral history practitioner where I can go in and say, well, what do you want your legacy to be, right? Do you want to do some legacy work? So it allows me to get bedside. It allows me the opportunity to afford that veteran and that caregiver or that family the chance to hear that story, the chance to learn more about how that veteran served and what their service meant to them. So in some capacity, I still, like I said, try to doula as much as I can.
I like that. Sounds like it's good for your heart too.
It's good for my soul. Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
is. I love it. So we are talking about veterans and sort of this unique intersection that you have as the spouse of a veteran yourself, and then this end-of-life work that you're doing as a doula, because 1 in every 4 Medicare hospice patient is a military veteran in the United States. That's a quarter of the Medicare hospice population that we provide care for. That's a lot of folks. That is a lot of folks. And they are unique. As every patient has unique needs, right? We know that. But military veterans, especially those who have served in combat areas, have very unique needs. Their spiritual care, their psychosocial, spiritual, emotional care, all of that is very different. And even though while it's unique to them individually. As a population, they have some special needs. So what have you seen in your experience to be the unique needs of veterans when it comes to end-of-life care?
Yeah. So when I think of end-of-life care for veterans, I want to first say this piece. We're not a monolith, right? We are all going to have different experiences. Our veteran piece of our identity is simply one part of our identity. Um, but what's ingrained in all of us is this shared military culture, this shared experience. One that, if you really want to be honest, right? Like if we're really having this honest conversation, we have the conversation about death and dying were instilled in us very early on after we raised our right hands, right? After we raised our right hand, we were already signing over our lives in wills just in case if something happened to us in the event we had to go to combat. These were the things that we wanted to happen. This is who would take care of our family. This is how our possessions would be dispersed, et cetera, et cetera. So death and dying has been a part of our culture as veterans and as service members very early on. But when you look at the experiences of veterans, there comes those pieces of, one, has that veteran served in combat, right? What does trauma look like? Has post-traumatic stress been a part of that veteran's experience post-service? Has military sexual trauma been a part of that veteran's experience? And not just for women veterans, but for male veterans as well. Moral injury. Did something happen along their journey or their season in service where they had to do something that went against what they believe, what they value, their humanity? Have they had bouts of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts? You know, some of those experiences you don't find in everyday individuals, right? Yes, I do understand that trauma does impact many people, but to the extent that it impacts the service members or veterans, it's slightly different. Then when you look at some of their illnesses, that are serious or terminal are caused or due to their service. You think of our Vietnam veterans, for example, and many of them have had Agent Orange that has turned into Parkinson's or some other form of cancer. You think about our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who were exposed to burn pits and now they have various forms of cancer. And so now you're looking at a veteran who has this terminal illness that may be related to their service. And how do we show up for them? And how do we make space to say, thank you for your service? We see what this illness has done because of your service, but how can we as a hospice organization, or how can we as a palliative care system or community, how can we show up and be present and bear witness and support not just you, but to support your caregiver and your loved one along this end of your life's continuum?
I want to touch on something that you mentioned. While we're supporting these caregivers who are taking care of these service members, do you ever encounter caregivers who have resentment or anger related to the fact that what's killing them was related to the sacrifice they made during their time of service?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've had conversations with caregivers on a one-on-one, right, where they may not want to share that level of information because their veteran is so patriotic or so stoic that they don't want to share that intimate piece of what they feel. Right. But absolutely, I've had veteran spouses that say, if he didn't go or if she didn't go, we wouldn't be facing this right now, right? And what's challenging when you think about the veteran population, oftentimes it's an older white male, right? Let's
Right.
just call it. But we're now seeing various forms of cancers in our younger veterans that have small children, right? Just last week alone, a project that I'm affiliated with that focuses on women veterans that have had breast cancer. We lost 2 women veterans just in that small community in 1 week. And both of those women were one was maybe, Helen, she wasn't even 40. And the other is maybe early 50s in 1 week. And so what we're seeing is we're looking at caregivers that are saying, I've been caregiving for X amount of time. For example, I'm going to share the story of another caregiver whose husband died of ALS. And she shared all of these things that, as her husband's health declined, I wish he wouldn't have done this, or I wish this would have been different.
Yeah.
But I know how much the military meant to him. And it's meeting those caregivers where they're at, because maybe, yes, indeed, for some, they did not put that uniform on, but they served this country too.
Yeah.
It's important that as we're providing that care for that veteran, we're also ensuring that we're wrapping services and supports around those caregivers as well. New statistics are getting ready to come out, but some of the most recent ones were that there are approximately 5.5 million caregivers for military and veteran communities. We know that the number is actually higher than that, right? We also know that within those caregivers are those children that are also helpers as well, that are providing care as well, that are experiencing secondary trauma sometimes, that are experiencing compassion fatigue and burnout because of what they're seeing. And so when I think about this work, and you called me a unicorn at the beginning, and sometimes I say to myself, I came to this space in such a unique way, but I think about these children that are caring for their parents that have terminal illnesses, and how, as they grow and as they become adults, how is our society going to support them as well? And how will those experiences that they face so young, how will those experiences play out later on in their lives? And how do we raise such a level of awareness where we're coming together and saying, wow, generations are being impacted because of military service. And instead of just saying thank you for Veterans Day or remembrances during Memorial Day, how do we show up and support this community as often as much as they possibly need throughout the course of their lives?
Yeah, there's a huge ripple effect to being a child caregiver. And I don't think we give it enough attention. Yeah, there are a lot of caregiver resources. We acknowledge 55 million unpaid caregivers across the United States, and we get that. But there's not as loud a conversation about how many of those caregivers are kids and the disruption that it causes to their lives, the changes that it causes to their academics, their social development, all kinds of things. So that's a really good point to bring up. When you are companioning a veteran at end of life, you're also companioning whatever generation of caregiver is there for them, whether it's their parent or a spouse or their kids.
So true.
Yeah. Talk about unique needs.
Let's ring the alarm on that one.
Oh, definitely. That's a great conversation to have. I hope you're enjoying this episode. We're going to pause for just a minute. My guest has more to share.
The sponsor for this week's episode is Barbara Carnes Books, featuring the work of award-winning hospice RN educator Barbara Carnes. BK Books is proud to offer the End of Life Guidelines series, a compilation of 5 essential education booklets designed to support those caring for terminally ill loved ones. At the heart of this bundle is Gone From My Sight, affectionately known as the Hospice Blue Book, a timeless resource that has touched over 40 million lives. This bundle is more than just information. It's a lifeline for families navigating the difficult stages of the dying process, offering guidance for the last months, weeks, days, and hours. Trusted by end-of-life workers nationwide, the booklets provide direction for managing symptoms, explain the dying process, address pain medication use, and offer suggestions for moving forward with grief. The End-of-Life Guidelines Series bundle from Barbara Carnes equips you with knowledge and tools to provide the best possible care. The bundle helps hospice agencies better educate patients and families, providing easy-to-understand guidance that can improve scores on their CAHPS satisfaction surveys. It's the ultimate caregiver's companion. Use it as part of your care plan today. Visit bkbooks.com today to order the End-of-Life Guidelines series to support your journey of compassionate caregiving.
I'm struck by what you said about military personnel. One of the first conversations they have is about death and dying.
Yes.
Do you think that veterans, or do you find that veterans in your experience as you work with them, that they are more comfortable having conversations about their own deaths?
I do. I think that there's a level of comfort, right, in having conversations because so early on we were exposed to death and dying. And for some who have served, they've lost comrades, right, throughout the course of their lives. But I also believe that the act of active listening and the act of bearing witness to what some of these veterans have faced while in service is an important aspect as well. Because when you think about the unfinished business, when you think about some of the guilt, shows up in that agitation that you all see in hospice, right? Yeah. It shows up in a way that it's more of an existential dilemma, right? Than it is in just physical health or mental health aspects. It's, will I be forgiven? Did I love enough? Was I loved when I came back, for example, and I was different because of what I saw in combat? And I showed up different to my family when they saw me in a different light. Was I loved? Did I love them? For some veterans who struggle with some of the atrocities that they saw in service and decided to isolate, and family relationships and family dynamics and other relationships were diminished because of that. It shows back up at the end, and figuring out a way to sit with it, potentially make peace if possible, ask for forgiveness where it needs to be had. It's more of an existential thing that I see versus I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid of dying with all of this excess baggage that I've carried along my journey, is more so what I hear. And I hope that makes sense in that existential way versus that physical or that medical model that we're so used to, more so looking at it from a human-centered approach as it relates to dying.
No, I totally get it. I think that explains it perfectly. They lived and functioned and worked in an arena where violence, war, armed combat, that was very accepted. It was encouraged. They were trained to do that. And so as a society and our culture is, if you're in the military, that's acceptable. And, oh, yeah, by the way, the atrocities are going to be part of the package. But when you begin to think beyond this place for whatever you think comes after, society may condone it and say this was part of your job. You were defending something, defending someone. But what does the higher power say for you? Absolutely. What does the divine mean for you? And how will you be judged or accepted, or what will that mean for you? So
Absolutely.
I totally understand that. I had a patient, he was probably 92, and he was in the Army, an Army veteran, and he experienced some delirium. It was before he began to actively physically die, but his family called them hallucinations, for lack of a better word. He would tell them that any headlights that were coming in the windows of his room at night were ambulances with children in them that had been injured. And they didn't know a whole lot about his military service as far as details went, but knew that he had driven an ambulance. And so a lot of that old history was coming out and sort of making itself known at that point in his life. And it was almost like his inhibitions and his ability to hold that down, those memories and what they meant for his psyche, those abilities were being lost as he began to move towards dying. And so those things began to come through the cracks for him.
Yeah. Helen, I love that you share that. You know, when I think about hospice and how we begin educating caregivers and families about what they're going to see along the way, for veteran families, I think it's so important to also educate them that there may be some sharing of experiences that you never heard. And I often like to say, our veterans share PG-13 versions of their experiences to protect and to keep their families safe.
Yeah, it's filtered.
It's filtered. And it's so important that we educate families that you may hear about some things that may have happened in Vietnam or in the Middle East that you never heard about. And how do we prepare those families to hear that, to filter it, but to make peace for themselves with that? So I cannot tell you thank you enough for sharing that story about that 92-year-old veteran, because there are many stories like that, right? You just heard, the families knew, okay, dad or mom or whoever that loved one was, this was their job.
Right.
But you didn't often hear about the details about the job, right? Or you didn't know what to ask. So you didn't. You just knew, grandma was a nurse in Vietnam.
Yeah, she was just a nurse. She did what every other nurse does, except not really.
Except not really.
Yeah. Yeah, and can you imagine what it's like to be a military, like an Army brat, right? The child of someone who has served, been in the military, and then to sit down and all of a sudden dad comes out with a reminiscence to share with the hospice chaplain or the hospice social worker that you have never heard before. And all of a sudden, here's dad dumping out a memory that he chose not to share with you, but he's sharing it with somebody who's a complete stranger.
Yep.
So where's the balance? How do you find balance as a caregiver to respect the service and the sacrifice that was made, right? Maybe life's work if it was a career military person. And then also to reconcile that with the fact that you're mad as hell, that they made him sick, or they created a circumstance where he felt unwelcome and depressed, or he chose substance abuse, maybe chose to harm himself, things like that. That's asking so much of our caregivers, and that's one of the reasons having a companion who's experienced and can say, I am a veteran. I live with a veteran. I've seen this. Yeah. So much value in having a companion like that.
There's so much value. There is a group here in Atlanta, and I love sharing this story. There was a gentleman, he was a veteran, a Navy veteran, I want to say. Health started failing rapidly and was in a long-term facility, and his wife visited him, and she went home that night, and unfortunately he died in the middle of the night. And the association that he was a part of, I've done some other work with them in the past. They reached out and said, hey, would you come and talk? Like, we feel really horrible that he died alone. And we don't know what to do with that because no veteran should ever have to die alone.
Right.
And so I said, of course, I'll come out. And so here I am in this room, predominantly Vietnam veterans in the space. And then there's me. And 9 out of 10 times, I'm colorful, I'm loud, I'm just, let's talk about death. And I had a very intimate conversation. And that was the very first time, Helen, I ever received a standing ovation about talking about death and dying in my life.
Oh, wow.
But here's what it did. After that meeting, one of the members reached back out, and she was a Vietnam veteran. She was a nurse in Vietnam. And she said, Qwynn, we can't have this happen again on our watch. We want to stand up a group of our members that will essentially stand watch in the community, not attached to hospice, not a hospice volunteer, but in the community that would be willing to stand watch, hold vigil. If we hear within a 20-mile radius that one of our veterans has a serious terminal illness, the last stage of life. So I began training with these volunteers. The last training I did, Helen, we had a volunteer. He was a retired MD veteran, 85 years old, 85 years old, sharp as a tack. But we had all of these veterans around the table. And I'm always going to ask, what's your why? Right? I am a firm believer that this work that we all do, we didn't wake up and say, yes, sign me up for death and dying.
No.
The work chose us. And hearing every veteran around that table share their why and why they want to be bedside and how they're able to hear stories that they know that their fellow veterans' families may not be ready to hear or cannot hear, touched my heart. Hearing them say, I'm not a therapist, I'm not all these things, but I can come and fix their hair, I can take the trash out, I can cut the lawn, I can just be present to let that caregiver leave and have respite, to let that caregiver leave and let that dying veteran share what's on their heart that they've never shared. And knowing that I put on a uniform too, I'm a safe space to share it with. When I tell you, it makes me, every time they say, hey, Qwynn, will you come and train us? Yes, because that is a gift of second service. That is a gift to be able to say, I still have this desire to serve my fellow veteran in some capacity. And it's an honor of mine to be able to walk alongside of those that want to companion veterans through the end of life.
It really is an honor to be able to do this work in any capacity.
Yes, yes.
But when you're able to do it in a leadership capacity, in a community that you obviously care very deeply about, you have a personal investment in it. And really, so every end-of-life worker should feel engaged and like they're invested in the work they're doing, because every death is relatable. You can say, oh, this patient reminds me of my grandmother, or, this patient is like my mother or one of my siblings. But in reality, every death is relatable, because this is another human being with a finite endpoint, just the same as we are. Every end-of-life worker, every doula, every nurse, every discipline.
Yeah.
It's another human.
It's another human. It's another human. Late last year, I had the opportunity to journey alongside a woman veteran. She, another breast cancer survivor, but this last year, she was diagnosed with a glioblastoma. And we journeyed together for the last year of her life. And towards the end, she asked me, what's going to happen? Give it to me. And her sister was her caregiver. But her sister also had a son that had autism. He was on the spectrum. And she said to me one day, she sent me a voice message and she said, "I'm dying. How do we explain it to my nephew? What do we do?" And so that ties in a whole nother element of how do we have conversations about death and dying with a multitude of populations, because it's important that we're looking at those that are on the spectrum, that we're looking at those that are neurodivergent or have intellectual disabilities, and how do we have those conversations about death and dying with them as well. We're all just really scratching the surface in the myriad of conversations that we need to be having around the world as it relates to death and dying, right? And so I'm just grateful that my work is niched enough that I am able to have these conversations in regards to a population that I am so connected to. And it's my hope that the way that I share the message, that everyday people, right? Like, you don't have to have this great degree of military culture or training behind you, because we get so lost in the sauce, right? About, okay, I don't know enough about the Korean War, or I don't know enough about this war, or I don't know enough about this.
Right.
If you show up with a sense of cultural humility, and when you realize that that person that you're journeying with is actually the expert and you're not, and you let them lead the way, and you go to that bedside with no agenda, that's a gift.
That's what every end-of-life experience should be like. Because when you approach a patient, let's say a person who is traveling very quickly and very soon to the end of the life, they are the expert in their experiences. Yeah. We're in there for a season.
That's it.
Teach me about what you did. Tell me about who you are. Tell me where you went. Tell me who you loved. Yeah. Tell me about your work, your beliefs, your faith. So it's amazing. So end of life and grief, it's a universal experience. And yet at the exact same time, it's the most diverse, unique, individualized experience all at the same time.
All at the same time. So I will say it time and time again, you don't have to have 75 degrees and 12 certificates to say you know things about the veteran population. I can promise you, even when you think you know it all, there's something that you don't know.
Right.
And once again, that's any community, right? But I tell people, just go to the bedside with cultural humility. You don't know it all. 9 out of 10 times, having the opportunity to journey with a veteran, I won't say that, oh, for the past X amount of years, this is the work that I've been doing. In that moment, I'm your battle buddy. That's it. I won't even share that I'm a doc, like that I'm just Qwynn.
Yeah.
That's it. Because it doesn't matter in that moment. What matters most is, how can I support you? How can I love you home, whatever home may look like for you, to the end. That's all that I'm here to do. And being able to look at other community members and saying, whether it's veterans, whether it's homeless populations, whether it's faith-based communities, we can all go back to some of the basic tenets of humanity that we all had hundreds of years ago, where we show up and just be present, right? The same way birth doulas help someone come into life is the same way we hold someone's hand as they're departing this life and moving on to whatever's next.
I am loving this conversation, but we're going to take a break right now. There's more to come.
If you're a hospice caregiver looking for resources to enhance your care, look no further than the Hospice Care Plan, A Path to Comfort. Available in both English or Spanish, this invaluable resource is designed to support caregivers in providing the best possible care for their loved ones. The Hospice Care Plan for Modonata Care now has integrated QR codes in each section of the booklet. Readers simply scan the code with a smartphone, and a free playlist of videos provides practical tips for caregiving and symptom management. It's like having a personalized guide at your fingertips. Caregivers will find 150 videos offering expert advice and practical guidance to navigate every aspect of caregiving. Hospice agencies and end-of-life doulas are now using the Hospice Care Plan booklet to support their patients and caregivers. It's become a trusted resource in the end-of-life community, helping to educate and equip caregivers. Visit thehospicecareplan.com today to purchase the Hospice Care Plan booklet. Empower yourself and the ones you care for with the Hospice Care Plan, a path to comfort. That's thehospicecareplan.com.
Qwynn, if you could go back all through the years, you're going to like this question. If you could go back to when you were a brand new little baby end-of-life doula, just starting out, taking care of your people, taking care of your community, what advice would you give yourself?
Stop being so hard on yourself. One, because you don't have to know everything. But if you bring empathy, you validate someone's experience, you actively listen. Can I say one curse word?
Oh, yeah.
Check your shit at the door.
I like it.
You could show up in a way that's authentic and not prescribed. When I became a doula, I wanted to know all that I needed to know about World War II veterans and Korean War veterans. And I wanted to know the facts. And I'm like, you know what? Know the eras, know what was happening during that time, right? Know what those generations experienced when they came home. And then let them tell you their story if they want to. Maybe they just want you to sit quiet and just be there. Do that too. Maybe they want to put together a legacy project. I've done that too. You lead the way. You want to show me pictures about showing me pictures, how you look in uniform, and tell me a whole story about it, and that's all that you want to do? I'm here for it. But I don't have a set agenda on how you're going to die. Who am I to tell you how you're going to die? What matters to you as you're dying?
I think that's good advice for even the most seasoned of end-of-life worker to remind themselves of every day. Check your shit at the door.
Shit at the door.
Yeah, because it's not your turn.
It's not your turn.
When it's your turn, it'll be all about you. Hopefully, if you receive good care, it'll be all about you. That's one of the reasons we have this podcast and why we're having this conversation is so that people will realize this is the kind of care I should be getting. This is the kind of care I should be giving. Yeah.
And in the midst of all of those things, being reflective and saying to yourself, well, as this professional, what are the lessons that I'm learning along the way? What are the lessons that I'm learning from the dying in terms of living? How do I live intentionally? How do I show up authentically me, right? That one veteran that I shared that had the glioblastoma, before she had her surgery, she went to Europe and she said, I'm going to kiss all the boys because I'm going to freaking die. So I'm going to kiss all the boys, Qwynn. And, it just was, and I chuckled too, right? Like, you learn so many things from people that are dying.
Yeah.
That it's so important that we pause and say, I'm going to eat all the cake. Right? Right? Like, I'm going to eat all the cake or whatever it is, and be intentional with how you live, with knowing you're going to die. Full stop. Period.
I love it.
I live intentional as hell every day of my life.
So, Qwynn, if you could sum up what you've learned in 3 words, what words would you choose? You only get 3.
Ask me the question again. Geez, that's tough.
What 3 words would you use to describe what you've learned as a doula from working with the dying?
Yeah. Dream, smile, and hope. But I'm going to give a caveat to hope,
Okay.
because I know we talk about hope and the positive and negative sides of hope
Right.
in our work. I talk about hope a lot because it's an acronym for me. Hearing other people's experiences.
Wow. This is the work that we do.
This is the work that we do. And Helen, by hearing other people's experiences, I'm able to live. I'm able to live. I'm able to make peace with things and experiences that I had in uniform, outside of uniform. That gives me hope.
Dream, smile,
It gives me hope.
and hope. Yeah.
Hope, dream, and smile. That's it.
That's perfect. Okay. You do some amazing work. You work with, we're going to get down to the business part of things.
Do it.
You work with Psych Armor,
Yes.
if I'm saying it right. You've also collaborated with We Honor Veterans to promote quality end-of-life care for female veterans, women veterans, which is very important. And you're also a part of the Doula Council for the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. You are a busy lady.
I am.
So tell me how my listeners can connect with you and the work that you're doing in the various spaces.
Yeah, I think one of the easiest ways that listeners can connect with me is, one, if you want to go to intheirhonor.info, which is my website, you can find me there. I answer all of any requests that come in. I'm the person that you're going to get a response from. There is an amazing collection that I did with Psych Armor, and it's called Caring for Veterans Through the End of Life. And it's a collection of micro courses, 3 to be exact. One that's for compassionate communities, one that's for healthcare providers, and one that's for caregivers and loved ones. And it's focused, each course gives 5 ways that you can support veterans through the end of life. That's on the Psych Armor platform. Free, and free again. There is no charge. We actually received a generous donation from a Vietnam veteran family that said this work needs to happen. We're going to fund it. And they did that. So please, if your listeners are interested, it's psycharmor.org, and it's the Caring for Veterans Through the End of Life collection. My work with We Honor Veterans is simple. I was on the NHPCO's We Honor Veterans. I was on their webpage and I realized, hey, we have all these great things about veterans and I don't see anything about women veterans. And I wanted to change that. So I reached out and said, hey, and we partnered together and we did that. And I was able to bring in an amazing colleague of mine. And we did a session on women veterans and their experiences through the end of life. And that's some work that I'll be working on into 2025, is really shaping the narrative on women veterans and sharing other minority veteran populations and how we can support them. Once again, we are not a monolith. We are not a monolith. I cannot stress that enough. So it's been wild and I stay busy and I'm grateful. I am super grateful for the work that I get to do. I also serve as a creative advisor for several organizations that are focusing on death and dying and supporting veterans. And it's like organizations say, hey, we have this idea. And I'll work one-on-one with them to come up with a strategic plan to figure out how can we make that idea come to fruition, right? How can we take it from an idea to implementation? How do we put a strategic plan, a framework around it so that it's sustainable wherever you are in your community? So no day is the same. Every day is a new day. And I'm just grateful that I get to do this work. I had one doula that's been in this space for years say, Qwynn, this is not just a moment. You are shaping a movement. And I teared up to those words. But if that's my legacy, if that's my work for this next leg of my life, so be it.
And what a wonderful legacy to be able to leave.
Agree.
You're sharing your gifts, your smiles, your hope. We love your dreams. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. You bless my day.
Thank you, my friend. You're stuck with me now.
No problem.
Thank you, Helen. I appreciate it. This has been an amazing, amazing conversation.
Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.